Have you ever heard of the Philippine American War? For many, it's a forgotten conflict, a mere footnote in history books, often overshadowed by the Spanish-American War that preceded it. But this war, which lasted from 1899 to 1902, and even longer in some areas, was a brutal and transformative period that profoundly shaped the futures of both the Philippines and the United States. Today, we're diving deep into this complex chapter of history to understand what happened, why it happened, and why it still matters. Our story begins in the late 19th century. The Philippines had been under Spanish colonial rule for over 300 years. But a powerful nationalist movement was brewing, led by figures like José Rizal and later Emilio Aguinaldo. Filipinos were fighting for their independence, and by 1898, they were on the verge of victory. The Philippine Revolution had successfully cornered the Spanish in Manila. It seemed like freedom was finally within reach. Then, a new global power entered the scene, the United States. The U.S. declared war on Spain in April 1898, famously sparked by the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. This was the Spanish-American War. The first major battle didn't happen in Cuba, though. It happened thousands of miles away in Manila Bay. Commodore George Dewey led the U.S. Asiatic Squadron to a swift and decisive victory, annihilating the Spanish fleet. At first, the Filipino revolutionaries, led by General Emilio Aguinaldo, saw the Americans as allies. They worked together to defeat the Spanish. Aguinaldo and his forces controlled the land, while the Americans controlled the sea. On June 12, 1898, Aguinaldo declared Philippine independence, establishing the first Philippine Republic. It was a moment of incredible hope and national pride. They had a constitution, a flag, and a functioning government. But the Americans had other plans. As the Spanish-American War concluded, the question was, what would happen to Spain's colonies? Many in the U.S., including President William McKinley, saw the Philippines as a strategic prize, a gateway to Asian markets, and a key location for a naval base. This was the age of imperialism, and the idea of manifest destiny was extending across the Pacific. A turning point came with the Treaty of Paris, signed in December 1898. In this treaty, Spain sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. The Filipinos, who had fought and bled for their freedom, were not consulted. They weren't even invited to the negotiating table. They had simply been transferred from one colonial master to another. Imagine their shock and betrayal. They had believed the Americans were liberators, but now they looked like conquerors. Tensions between the American and Filipino forces, who were now uneasily occupying areas around Manila, were sky high. Both sides were dug in, watching each other with suspicion. The inevitable finally happened on the night of February 4, 1899. An American private, William Grayson, fired on a group of Filipino soldiers crossing a bridge in Santa Mesa, Manila. This single shot ignited the Philippine-American War. The war is often divided into two phases. The first phase, from 1899 to 1900, was a period of conventional warfare. The newly formed Philippine Republic Army, despite being outgunned and undertrained, fought bravely against the well-equipped American forces. They engaged in pitched battles, trying to defend the Republic. However, the American military superiority was overwhelming. They captured city after city, pushing the Filipino forces further into the countryside. By late 1899, the conventional army of the Republic was broken, and President Aguinaldo was forced to flee into the mountains of northern Luzon. But this was not the end. It was the beginning of the second phase, a long and grueling guerrilla war. Aguinaldo declared that the fight would continue through unconventional tactics. Filipino fighters, familiar with the terrain, used hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and sabotage to harass the American occupiers. The entire population was mobilized. Villages provided food, shelter, and intelligence to the guerrillas. It became a people's war. The American response to this guerrilla campaign was harsh. Frustrated by an enemy they couldn't pin down, the U.S. military adopted counterinsurgency tactics that were often brutal. They established reconcentration camps, where civilians were forced into fortified zones. The goal was to separate the guerrillas from their civilian support base, but these camps were often overcrowded and unsanitary, leading to widespread disease and death. The military also employed tactics like the water cure, a form of torture used to extract information. It was a dark and violent period, with significant casualties on both sides, but especially among the Filipino civilian population. One of the most infamous episodes was the Balangiga massacre in 1901. In the town of Balangiga on the island of Samar, Filipino villagers and guerrillas launched a surprise attack on an American company, resulting in a significant American loss. The retaliation was swift and merciless. General Jacob H. Smith issued an order to turn the island of Samar into a howling wilderness. He instructed his men to kill any male over the age of 10 capable of bearing arms. This event sparked outrage back in the United States when it was reported, leading to a court-martial for General Smith. The war officially ended after the capture of General Aguinaldo in March 1901. He was tricked by American forces who disguised themselves as Filipino soldiers. After his capture, Aguinaldo swore an oath of allegiance to the United States and issued a proclamation calling for his countrymen to lay down their arms. While many did, the resistance continued in various parts of the Philippines for years, with some groups fighting on until as late as 1913. So, what was the legacy of this war? The human cost was immense. While exact numbers are debated, historians estimate that over 4,200 American soldiers and about 20,000 Filipino soldiers died. The civilian death toll was catastrophic, with estimates ranging from 200,000 to 1,000,000 Filipinos perishing from violence, famine, and disease. It was a devastating blow to the Filipino nation. For the United States, the war was a defining moment in its journey to becoming a global power. It was America's first major overseas colonial war, and it sparked a fierce debate at home. An anti-imperialist league was formed, with prominent members like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, who argued that colonizing the Philippines went against the core American values of liberty and self-determination. Twain, in particular, wrote scathing essays criticizing the war. On the other side, imperialists like Theodore Roosevelt argued for America's duty to civilize and govern the Filipinos, a concept often referred to as the white man's burden. The American colonial period in the Philippines lasted until 1946. During this time, the U.S. introduced significant changes in education, governance, and infrastructure. English became a primary language, and a public school system was established. The Americans also built roads, bridges, and hospitals. However, this was all done under the framework of colonial rule. The Philippine economy was structured to benefit the United States, and political power was held by a small, U.S.-approved elite. The dream of genuine independence, which had burned so brightly in 1898, was deferred for nearly half a century. Looking back, the Philippine American War is a complex and often painful subject. It's a story of a nation's valiant struggle for freedom against overwhelming odds. It is also a story about the contradictions of American foreign policy, a nation born from a revolution against an empire becoming an imperial power itself. Understanding this war helps us understand the deep and intricate relationship that exists between the Philippines and the United States to this day. It's a history that deserves to be remembered, not as a simple footnote, but as a pivotal event that shaped the modern world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. And let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like to explore. See you next time.